Metropolis is a seminal piece of science fiction, and it is the first silent movie that we've ever discussed on the Atomic Cinema Experiment. Join us as we break down the film's themes and marvel at its sheer ambition. Welcome everyone to the Atomic Cinema Experiment. I am Peter, and joining me as always as Fröhlich Tara.
Greetings to... Oh, wait. Guten Tag.
There you go. Very good. This is a science fiction movie podcast. We get together, we talk about a sci-fi movie, and we're doing a German film, if that wasn't obvious from the opening. But this is going to be Metropolis, which was the Patreon vote winner last time there was a vote. So this is the oldest film we've ever reviewed, and will probably always be the oldest film we ever review, unless we do like a collection of shorts or something that came before this. But you know, this is 1927. This is Fritz Lang's Metropolis, so we're going to talk about it.
Before even the first Frankenstein movie. Before talkies.
That's not true.
Oh, there's another one?
There's a Frankenstein, I'm sure there's a silent Frankenstein movie before the 1931 one.
Oh.
I'm sure there is.
Well, never mind.
Positive, but yes. So we'll start spoiler free as we always do. We'll give you a warning before we go into spoilers. So it's almost a daunting task. Like, you know, like here's the first proper big, like, extravagant science fiction film. And there's a lot going into this. It's one of those things where, you know, as we're going to talk about this, I'm sure we're going to talk about things that are impressive for the time because it's 1927, and it's it's aiming high. It's taking some big swings for 1927. It absolutely is. But at the same time, yeah, we'll say, obviously some of these effects are a little bit dated because, you know, they're very simple, and it's just a crossfade to show this or something like that. And obviously it's a silent film. In fact, this is the first time we've ever done a silent film on the show, so that'll be interesting to talk about. In fact, it's one of the, I don't know, I've only seen like maybe a handful of silent films, I think. You know, this is like one of maybe 4 or 5 that I've seen, you know, which I had seen this before. This was my second time watching it, but this was for you, your first time.
Yes. I've dabbled in silent film as well. I wouldn't say I'm like a student. I was never a student of film like you were, so I'm sure there's some ones that I've missed. But I have watched, I've watched a Faust movie.
Mm-hmm.
Which was silent. I think that was also German, but it wasn't Fritz Lang.
Yeah, I've seen Nosferatu.
All Quiet on the Western Front, which was silent, and I've seen the talkie version of it.
Yeah, Nosferatu, which is also German, funnily enough. I've seen The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, and then maybe a couple of Chaplin movies. Like, that's basically it. That's
I've only really seen clips. I've never seen any actual Chaplin films.
So that's the extent of my silent sort of repertoire. So, you know, it's daunting when you look at this movie and it's like 2.5 hours long. These days anyway, now that it's mostly back to the original cut. Mostly, there's still one scene that's missing. And if you watch the new restored version, it just has to tell you what happens in it. Because unfortunately, you can't just get away with not telling the audience because it's kind of a prominent moment. You know, something significant changes in the scene. So it'd be very confusing if they didn't tell you. But yeah, so it's a very interesting viewing experience because in like 2008, they found basically a print of the longer cut, the original Fritz Lang cut, which is 2.5 hours long, and reinserted it into the movie. But this was like 16mm, it was in rough shape, whereas because the rest of the film, which obviously it's still from 1927, so it can only look so good, but it does look very good. It looks like restored, really, you know, it looks great in 1080p or whatever. I don't know if there's a 4K version yet.
It's beautiful looking.
Yeah, but it's, you know, it's very pretty, it's very detailed. And then you switch to the 16mm footage of the clips and bits that were missing, and it's like very noticeable. Part of it's letterboxed, it's very scratchy, all the rest of it. Almost to the point where I wish like the Blu-ray or the Criterion app or whatever you're using to watch this now, I do wish for interest's sake you could watch the shorter version as well that was preserved, just so you could watch the shorter cut that is completely intact in its glory. Just
you know what I think they should do?
For comparison, yes.
I think they should just give everything to Peter Jackson and say, hey, do your thing. Make this look good.
No, I don't agree with that. But that's I don't want them tampering with, like, you know, like, clean it up as best you can, but no tampering, no colorization. I don't want any of that.
Make it an option. No, he won't colorize it. Just restore it.
Okay. Well, a lot of work did get done to this. It's not like they didn't do anything. You know, there's a lot of work. In fact, on the subject, as of January 1st, which was yesterday at the time of recording, this film is public domain. So oddly
Let's
timed.
make our Metropolis movie.
Oddly timed. Obviously, this fancy new restoration isn't, because it's only from 2010, but the original version is public domain, and you can write something or make a sequel if you want, and no one can stop you because it's public domain, baby. That's what it means. So also
100 years is not the cutoff then.
No, I guess it must be 95, because, or 94? Yeah, 27?
94 years?
Yeah, something like that. I don't know. It used to be less, and then Disney lawyers extended it in the 90s because they were worried about Mickey Mouse going public domain. But it's coming up. It's coming up.
You can't outrun the law, Disney.
So that's just interesting. Sherlock Holmes also went public domain.
Uh-oh.
Yesterday.
You get Sherlock Holmes, Blood and Honey soon.
You're going to get Sherlock Holmes everywhere because everyone can do Sherlock Holmes now. As always, anything that was created a little bit later that you don't realize was a later creation isn't public domain yet. You know, because the example I always bring up, because I know more about it, is like, you know, when Batman and Superman go public domain in, like, you know, 15 years, whatever it is. Yeah, they're public domain, but a lot of their villains didn't come till later. You know, so some of the ideas, like, you know, Kryptonite, for example, was a good bit later than Superman's creation, so you can't just use everything, but it's an interesting little thing. So it just happens to be
Superman started with 0 weaknesses, and then the writers were like, well, this is a little boring.
Well, he also started with, like, almost none of his powers. Like, he was just strong and could jump. like the flight, the heat vision, all that stuff came later as well.
Was he alien?
I think he was still alien, yeah. As many as I've read that Action Comics, like 38 or whatever it is. No, it's Action Comics 1. Yeah, it's Action Comics 1. It's 1938, it's Action Comics 1, and then...
Over the car.
Yeah. Batman, on the other hand, was Detective Comics 27. He wasn't there at the start of Detective Comics. This is getting way off topic, but we're, you know, like, this is the context of which we're reviewing this, is that it's just went public domain, so that's how old the movie is. And it's also kind of, but on the flip side of that, it's also how young the medium of film is, that we're only just hitting that point with film. And this is, you know, obviously film started before this, and there's short films, and there's, you know, even Nosferatu that we brought up as an earlier 20s film, but, you know, this really is, like, for us in terms of what we like in cinema, it's very much the birth, or even, you know, it's the pre-birth, it's the conception of cinema.
It's the water breaking of cinema.
You know, but in a lot of ways, like, if you think of, like, when talkies, you know, when audio, like, sort of finally fully formed what cinema was, which actually was, I think it was the same. I think it was 1927 as well. The Jazz Singer came out maybe a year later, but that in many ways fully formed the baby of cinema. So in a way, silent film does feel like a slightly, like, just before it really came into what it was. But so a couple of quick things about silent film, just to get this out of the way. So silent film was shot at 16 frames per second, but was still shown at 24 frames per second usually, and that's what we're watching it in now. And that's why all silent films look too quick. They're all looking like they're in quick motion. And the reason for that was basically that film costs a lot of money. You know, the reels of film, so you try to save money where you can. And 16 frames is kind of seen as on the threshold of what the human eye will accept as motion. You know, anything less than that, then it starts to just look like a series of images as opposed to actual video. So the idea was that you shoot at 16 frames per second, and then you speed it up to showing it at 24 frames, so it looks smoother because you're showing 24 frames per second, but you're showing it quicker than it was actually recorded, so you're getting this quick thing. And the only reason, so they thought that was acceptable and that people wouldn't care that much, and the only reason why it became normal speed at some point was because of sound. Because if you show it too quick with sound, then everyone will sound like a chipmunk and it'll sound stupid. So there was sound that said, no, this has to run at, like, the correct speed. And that's when recording at 24 frames per second became the standard, and 24 frames per second is still the standard 100 years later. So there's your history lesson for
Very cool.
yeah. So that's why. So yeah, the premise of Metropolis is a city of Metropolis. Metropolis also means city, but here it seems to also be the name of the city, I think. And we have the rich man who built the city, who is the head of the city. We have his son, who is this rich boy who kind of becomes aware that the poor who are working in the underground and the lower sections of the city are having a rough time. He falls in love with a woman who's down there, and like, well, all of the fact that the city might be a little futuristic, where's the sci-fi part? Oh, there's also a mad inventor who's building a robot. That's also going on, and that comes into play as well.
And this is like a future dystopia kind of world.
Yeah, and you sort of, there's, obviously it looks of its time, but there's one particular moment where you're just looking at the city, and it's obviously all these miniatures of the buildings and stuff, but they've got like, lights and neon signs or something that's akin to that anyway, and it's like, yeah, this is just like a 1927 version of like a shot of like Blade Runner city. That's all it is. It's just that, but like what they could achieve in 1927, and in that sense, it looks very kind of cool, and it's like, oh, and it's got a mixture of like a modern metropolis, but also like this like Art Deco and like Gothic sort of stylings put into some of the decor and like the design of it. So it's got kind of an interesting thing. In fact, do you know what I noticed watching it this time is how much of an influence it might have had in Batman the Animated Series.
It looks very Gotham in some areas.
It looks very Gotham, and not only that, like there's a henchman for the dad, Joe
The Thin Man?
Joe Frederson, yeah. So he's got a henchman. So Joe Frederson is the rich man who built the city, and he's got a henchman named the Thin Man. His hat, I swear the Joker's wearing that exact hat in Batman the Animated Series, like, a lot. And there's even moments in this where he felt kind of jokery because he's kind of skinny and he's sort of grinning at people and stuff.
He's got, he's evil when you look at him. He's got like a really gaunt face, but like he's long and lean, and I mean, he's described as the Thin Man, but he's wearing a lot of heavy stuff, so it's kind of hard to see if he's actually thin. But like, he does look gaunt in the face, and he's got like a weird sinister smile thing going on to him also. Absolutely.
And then there's actually some themes in this is the first, because I watched it for the first time like maybe a decade or 15 years ago or something like that. This is the first time I've watched it since I've seen Twin Peaks, and specifically season 3 of Twin Peaks, and there was some thematic things popping up in this that I went, oh, I think David Lynch is a fan of Metropolis, which would make sense because he's a film guy.
Honestly, there's a lot of things I saw when I watched this movie for the first time today. There's a lot of, okay, yeah, I know it came first, but like there's a lot of things that have been inspired by this.
I mean, hell, we can even sort of say that there's some Terminator things in this. We can see there's
definitely some Matrix in it.
Yeah, like there's
Blade Runner for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, it very much is like the grandfather of a lot of things. But I think a lot of those things like are kind of very on the surface. But the Twin Peaks one was kind of wowing me because I'm like, oh shit, this is more of a deep cut. I was not expecting this. I was getting kind of wowed by it.
I've never seen Twin Peaks, so I can't be here to say yes. I'm afraid.
Just assume I'm correct, Tara.
Well, I assume so, but like,
yeah. But anyway,
I'm sure other people out there are excited about this.
Anyway, I'll talk a bit more about that when we're in spoilers. But Tara, what did you think of Metropolis?
Honestly, like I was kind of blown away by it. Like from the beginning, I thought it was like visually just next level. I mean, obviously for the time, everything kind of looks. It looks like old future, but I like that look of that. I mean, I enjoy retrofuturism in general, but this does feel like it's something more special than that. Like it is its own thing. There's clearly a lot of influence that this movie has had on other films, but it's still very unique to look at. Like, even the opening shot of like the workers and stuff, and they're marching towards work, and the other ones are marching towards home, and like they have to say so much through images that everything's hyper exaggerated. But I love it. I love the way that looks. So
yeah, it's a shift change. So yeah, it's like some are going to work, some are coming, because I guess it literally starts with the steam like klaxon thing going off to be like, hey, shift change, like swap in and out.
Yeah, it's so it's, you know, it definitely comes from a time of industrialization and like the allure of technology and the class systems. Like there's just so much happening in the movie that you pick up on right away with, you know, minimal dialogue. But it's because of that hyper exaggeration, everything is so pretty to look at, or so interesting to look at and analyze. And yeah, I feel like I'm watching an opera when I watch it.
Yeah,
I loved it though. I really did.
Yeah, there's a lot of extras. There's, you know, like it's funny because I think like there's some things that feel still ahead of the time, and then there's obviously other things that do feel dated just because technology's moved forward or whatever. But like, it's this really interesting mixture because when you watch it, there's an equal number of things that feel like, okay, we've moved forward with technology in this way, we've evolved how we tell this kind of story this way. You know, this character's still kind of a damsel. I mean, she's important, but she's still kind of a damsel in key scenes and stuff like that. But at the same time, there's other elements that feel like they're thinking so far ahead. Like they're like, I can't imagine that someone in 1927 was thinking about science fiction this way and thinking about a story in this way. It is really this weird meeting of old and new where, like you say, part of that feeling like an opera is because it is pulling on some tropes. And there's a quote in the Wikipedia page about how at the time like the reception wasn't that strong, and H.G. Wells called it trite. Did not like it.
Wow, that's surprising.
And it's kind of funny to think that there's some things about it that even at the time might have felt a little like classical, but then there's other parts of it that feel super like, you know, thoughtful and like, yeah, you know.
Do you think because at that time everyone was so anti-communism that maybe there's also a bit of that, we don't like this?
It's interesting you say that because it does also say that it was criticized for having a communist message.
Yeah, because I was picking up on this, like, wow, this is like a very relevant message for today, especially with younger generations sort of seeing the appeal of socialism. And this message here of like the working class and how, you know, we're all just caught in this machine, which can literally kill us. And like, that's our whole point of living, is just to give other people, you know, a paradise to live in. So like, there's a lot of things here that I think would speak to, you know, the generation that came 100 years from this film.
Yeah, it's actually kind of shocking just how relevant it still is. I mean, this is, if you want to boil it down, it's a story of the 1%ers and the working class finally kind of conflicting in something, and like that is still relevant. It's if anything, it's sad how relevant it still is. So all this time later, isn't
that a message that comes up a lot in our reviews when we review older stuff?
I know. No one's learned that goddamn thing.
God damn it. It's funny how dear. You know, you could say you can release this or make a remake of this so that it, you know, it'll speak to the people of today, but the only reason they would make a remake of it is like, oh, it's a name you recognize and we're going to put Chris Pratt in it.
Yeah, it's a very cynical thing. Yeah,
it's all cynical. It wouldn't be the same thing, much like The Day the Earth Stood Still, when we talked about that versus the remake of it, where like, okay, but like, what is the movie trying to say? Like, what are you trying to tell the audience? Give us money.
Yeah,
there's no heart to anything anymore.
It is wild watching this and like seeing the miniatures of the city, and there's not tons of shots of the city, but when you do see them, like they're trying to like present this city that has roads that are highways that are like up where the planes are flying. So there's like highways built around the skyscrapers at different levels.
Tubes that people walk through between buildings and stuff.
There's
looks
like,
awesome.
There's like these like individual elevator things where it's just like constantly going up, and like, so imagine like instead of like one elevator with a chain pulling it up and down, there was just like a rotating like series of pods, so that when the pod goes up past the elevator door, so when the pod goes up past the door and someone steps out, literally seconds later the next pod's got someone in it, and then, you know, like, there's just people gonna
you wait for an empty pod and then you walk in.
It's almost like a self-serving like buffet or food, like a food thing where there's like plates, like, you know, like you're at one of those places where your meal comes out in a tray and it's like a conveyor belt. It's one of those.
Again, like I saw that design, I'm like, what a cool design for a future thing, but also no regard to safety. But that's kind of also the point of this movie, is like, how can we make things as efficient as possible with no regard to human safety, because they're the part that is expendable.
Yeah, absolutely. So
oh, it's perfect design for this film.
So yeah, the theory, like some stuff does feel really old school and operatic, like the mad scientist who is like, tormented by a lost love.
Frankenstein.
Yeah,
Dr. Frankenstein.
You've got those elements, and you've got like obviously some. Well, I'm going to praise a lot of what it does for the time period and the effects. There's also other things, like at one point when there's like a flood happening, like the water immediately gives away the scale of the models, because you can't fake the size of water. Like water's just water. So it's like, oh, like that gives it away, but it's obviously got a charm to it, and you respect like all the crazy things they're trying to do in a movie from 1927. Like this movie's got things in it that like would still feel like a blockbuster if they tried it today. Like if you did this in CG today, it would still feel like a pretty big spectacle type movie.
Well, yeah, it does turn into a disaster movie at one point.
Yeah, so yeah, a lot of wild things going on, and some fun performances. In fact, it's notable that the Thin Man that we talked about, the henchman character who kind of like spies on people, like so many of his scenes in this was the added footage of the lower quality. Like if you took out all that stuff, there wouldn't be much of him left in the movie. Like most of his best stuff was in the extra so that's really quite fascinating.
Job was just to find the sun, right? So like it was but a lot of, I guess that was the thing that could be cut, is him searching or him meeting up with other people.
Yeah, you just sort of take it for granted, I guess, in the shorter cut, which I've never seen the shorter cut, but because the footage looks so different, you can clearly see what they cut out, and sometimes it is a bit distracting when it's like these little snippets within a larger scene as opposed to like a full scene on its own. But you can sort of see, you can kind of see how if they cut that part out, it just cuts to this reaction. It just kind of works. It just kind of, you lose a little bit of the nuance, shows a little bit of an extra reaction to like this. There's a scene early on when the son goes to see his father. So Frieder goes to see his father, and he's saying, "The people down there are suffering, father," and he's like, "They're where they belong." And then there's like the spliced in footage that was obviously cut of like his reaction to that, and like it's quite important from the context of, we're seeing like how horrified he is that his father feels that way.
Honestly, like when I watched that moment, I thought, wow, I can't believe this was a scene that was cut. Or maybe that's something I take for granted watching a modern day movie, is that you would want, it's the characters are the most important thing. You want to see their reaction. You want to see the horror of it sink in, or like the betrayal sink in. But in this movie, they're like, get rid of it. Just show him running away out of the scene to get to the next one.
Yeah.
And they left out the drama. They left out the acting.
Yeah. Well, again, it's just them trying to cut it down because it was 2.5. And keep in mind, this was a time period when movies were like an hour and 10 minutes. So this probably felt quite long. And imagine as well, this is running at a faster frame rate than it was recorded at. Imagine if it was actually going at the 16 frames per second. It'd be another, 40 minutes, maybe? Something like that?
I mean, they got intermissions.
It'd be over 3 hours long easy if it was actually running at the correct rate. And I guess the only reason why you don't, because you could theoretically just slow it down, but I guess it is just like too close to looking like still images. Maybe it's just it's better just having it a bit quick, because otherwise it just looks a bit too framey, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, you get into it. It's really okay when you watch it. I mean, I understand what you're saying, that like everything looks sped up, but like when you watch clips of Buster Keaton or Charlie Chaplin, it looks very similar. But and like the music's all exciting too and fast usually to keep up with the pace of the characters. But I don't know, you just kind of get into it. You kind of get into the flow and forget about it.
Yeah, I did like some of the music actually, especially early on. See when all the workers are going down for their shift. There's this sort of like thing it does in the music where it's just this like a what's the opposite of a crescendo? There's a word for it, damn it. Diminuendo, I want to say, maybe? Anyway, regardless, like it does this thing where it just keeps going lower and lower, and you can really feel it. Like by the time it gets to that last note in the phrase, because it's like 8 notes in a row where it just keep descending. By the time it gets to that last note, you can start feeling it in your gut. It's like, like that's just too low for comfort. Like how low it's going. So it feels like a big story. It feels weighty. Just from the music, and the music has to like do a lot of lifting because there's no other audio. It's just music.
Yeah.
Like it honestly, like I think the first time I sat down to watch this, because and it might have been the first silent film I watched when I first watched it. Like I might have worried, like, is this going to like hold my attention, especially for 2.5 hours? Is this going to be a tough watch? And For the most part, I actually think it's an easier watch than I think you might expect, because it is quite like atmospheric. You do kind of get into it. Some things do feel quite rushed, and like characters, like this is always a problem in these movies from this time period. But like the way two characters like meet each other and instantly one of them's in love, it's just kind of like, okay, all right, this is just part of the this is of its time. This is how stories were written. People just fell in love instantly, and that's just like, you just roll with it and you accept it. But for the most part, there's maybe a little bit in like in the second half, there's maybe a lot of action going on that's very repetitive, especially in this longer cut, that maybe does get a little bit, like, okay, there's maybe some time here that maybe could have been trimmed down still from, maybe you didn't have to put all of these shots of like the crowd running in again, but minor quibbles. Like, it's a very easy to watch film, I think. If you're someone who cares about film, if you're someone who cares about the history of cinema and science fiction, like there's a lot of stuff to glean from this and sort of get out of it. And
yeah,
genuinely is largely still quite entertaining as well. Like, a lot of the performances are quite good.
Yeah, I think they're very fun to watch. I mean, like I said before, everything has to be kind of exaggerated, which can either take you out of a film or just allow yourself to get into this world a bit better because it's silent. So once you already know what you're getting into, I think it is a very easy watch. Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't think there's too much you can actually spoil really in this, but we have kept the spoiler free up until now. I will give the spoiler warning in case you care about Metropolis spoilers from 1927. But everyone should have the choice of watching something with no spoilers. So I respect it.
Except for our bonus movies, we don't care about spoilers with those.
That's because we usually pick bad movies that are obviously bad, and no one should care. But
bad according to who?
Anyone with a brain.
I resemble that remark. Resent that remark.
You did that intentionally. Tara's funnier and smarter than she likes to let on sometimes.
I do like bad movies, though.
You do like bad movies. I
like Metropolis. I like this movie a lot.
There's nothing wrong with...
I like entertainment.
There's nothing wrong with liking bad movies. Just admit they're bad and enjoy them. That's all. Easy.
I think there's a threshold that can be broken by a bad film to where it becomes good. You seem to disagree, but whatever. That's not what this movie is, so we won't talk about it.
Yeah, somehow this has turned into a joy and mnemonic debate again. No. We're not doing it.
That was a genuinely good movie. That wasn't a so bad it's good movie.
Well, Tara's credibility is once again kicked out of a window. No? Okay. So
my credibility has been defenestrated.
All right, so we have the sci-fi side of this that we should talk about, which is the robot to, and in a very, obviously it's very kind of hokey and science fiction-y, like the fact that he can
Looks better than Gort.
Looks better than Gort, yeah, nah, it does. But like, what happens with it is that the scientist, right, whose name I'm just going to get because it's cool.
Rammstein.
It's not Rammstein. Shut up. Rotwang.
Rolf. What is it?
Rotwang.
Rotwang. That doesn't sound
Rotwang.
German. Spell it.
Rotwang.
Rotwang. Rotwang.
Rotwang. Probably, yeah. It's probably a V sound. Yeah, you're right. Rotwang. Yeah.
Wang. Doesn't sound German.
Sounds like red dick.
Rotwang.
Because rot is red, I'm sure, if I remember from my high school German days. But it's been a while.
I never took German, but I have German and Austrian family.
Yes. But yeah, Rotwang, the mad inventor, so he hates Friederson, right? He hates the creator because he was in love with the woman who became Friederson's wife and Frieder's father. And then she died, and he's got a big head monument to her in her memory. And Friederson comes to him when he's like suspecting that the workers, the filthy, no good commoners, are up to something, right? Because they keep finding these plans in their pockets and he doesn't understand them. So he goes to the inventor and asks, what the hell? What's going on here? And the inventor can't not show him. He's like, look, I've made a robot. You need to see this.
Never mind this. Never mind this other thing.
You need to see my robot.
They're just pooling somewhere in the catacombs against you. Don't worry about it.
And we get this.
Check out what I got.
We get this robot. He calls it a machine man, even though it's very feminine, even before it's like turned into a woman. And there's a little bit of patriarchy in it. Like, or I was thinking species. I can see a little bit of the species design in this robot. Not gonna lie.
She's got all her lady parts. We know why he made her.
Well, he literally wants to make it like he's modeling her after this dead woman
Hell.
that he was in love with. Yeah, Hell is her name.
Yeah.
Short for Helen or Hellenberger or something probably.
Yeah. Helga?
Maybe Helga. Yeah, that's also very German. Yes. But like. He shows her. He's like, "Hey, I'm going to turn her on. That sounds bad. You know what I mean? Because she's dormant. She's not awake yet, right?
Nice.
Right. And like when she's awake, you'll not be able to tell the difference between her and a human being." And I was like, I don't know. She looks pretty robotic, right? Turns out later on when he scans our female lead, right, Maria, it basically Terminators the robot, and then it just completely gives it this coating of. Like a human, right? And it looks like her. So the whole idea is that they replace Maria with evil robot Maria, who's there to like, sow dissent and like make the worker. Because Maria is this character is introduced, and immediately our rich boy Frieder, who's up in his like country club, like chasing around women because that's what he does because he's a 1%er.
Yeah, it's called like a boys club.
Yeah. And they're running around just playing games, and then Maria somehow is
more than that.
Sorry?
More than that, but go on.
Sure.
I want to talk about this club.
Oh, we can talk about it, yeah. But Maria somehow brings up like a group of the poor children. Somehow she's been able to do it. I assume she's a teacher. That's like her role, perhaps. But she brings up these kids and says, this is your brothers, this is how they live. And she's not really meant to be here. Security comes to kick her out quite quickly. But immediately Frieder's like, irrelevant to this, but we brought up Wayne's World before we started recording, and it's like Wayne's World where he sees Tia Carey's character.
Swing.
Yeah, he's basically he's swinging, and he must know where she's from, and he goes down to like and all the rest of it. But when he eventually finds her later, we'll talk about all his antics to get there. But when he eventually finds her, she turns out to be this like sort of almost like. I don't know, prophesizer? Philosopher?
She's sort of
a preacher?
Presented as like an angel or a saint or something,
yeah,
right? But she's a rebel leader. She's
giving speeches to the workers and saying how like the head and the hands representing the working class, the head being the 1%ers up in the towers. There needs to be a heart to mediate them. And it kind of talks about the heart as like a chosen one, and that's ultimately that's going to be Frieder, who's going to like be this mediator between the heart and the head and the hands, and he's going to bring the working class and the rich together and harmony potentially after the story. We never get to see how that's going to work. We end the movie with a handshake that says he did it. Don't think about it after that, because who knows. But
we have automatons.
True. We got robots now. Although the inventor's dead at the end of the movie, so I don't know if they can just. Can they make
so
more?
It's a robot.
I don't know. But anyway, so she's like this person inspiring them and giving them hope and all these things. And Friederson, big bad evil rich man who built the city, doesn't want that. He wants them to be scared. He wants them to be, obedient. He wants all these things. So I wants the inventor to make her look like Maria, so that her credibility will be ruined, and it'll inspire them to do something that will mean that he can use force against them. He can like just justifiably start stamping them down on them. And it's like, okay, this is very relevant. This is all very political and all that stuff. But the inventor, Rotvang, he secretly still hates Friederson and wants evil robot Maria to take down the entire city and like ruin everything, so that he can get his revenge. She'll still do what Friederson wants, but he wants her to like ruin the city because that's Friederson's baby. That's his real son. And he also wants his son to be killed too. So that's kind of where we get to. And the reason why I'm saying all this is that we get like a very Terminator-esque sort of thing where, even though she doesn't act like a Terminator, she acts like just like an evil doppelganger. And the actress is putting effort into this. Like she's doing the evil eyebrow. Like immediately, as soon as like she's got the skin on her and she looks like a human, like immediately she starts doing the evil eyebrow. And
she's great.
Yeah, just she goes to like one of these like boys clubs things, and we get this montage where she basically like makes them all go nuts and start fighting over her, and let the murders happen. It's mostly implied, but the general idea is that she's causing like actual chaos. Like she's making people start killing each other and stuff. All wild.
They're feminine wilds.
Yeah, there's a shot of like all the men in the club at one point looking at her, and they're all kind of like,
they are so turned on.
They are thirsty. That is the only, like, they are demonically thirsty.
They turn into dogs is really what it's like showing.
And she's lapping it up, and she's doing this weird like belly dance thing. It's the least sexy thing I've ever seen, but these men are all into. they're all like the 1920s. Very different time. Yeah, I don't understand anything they think's like attractive in this. I really don't. But that's okay. So all of this is to say that we get, you know, like her being like burned by fire at the end as if she's a witch, which kind of, it's supposed to be like Terminator where it melts off her skin and then she's the robot again, but in this movie it's just like a fade. It's a fade to the robot costume. Yeah,
you understand what's going on still,
of course
because she's not phased by the fire at all.
She's laughing. She's
a witch. Like she's doing the witch performative act for everybody, and
cackling away.
When it reveals that she's a robot, everyone else is totally afraid all of a sudden.
They're like, oh shit. Yeah, because
you can do this now?
Because even though Frieder knows that there's an evil one and it's not really her, he doesn't know that that's her specifically right now, so he's like trying to save her. He's like, let me through.
He didn't look to see if she was wearing eyeliner.
One of the tell signs, yes.
Yes, of a robot.
Yeah, but yeah, actually this actually is so this part where she's like making everyone go crazy and like basically spreading like panic and hysteria. This is one of the things that's very Twin Peaks season 3, and not only is this idea very Twin Peaks, the reason why I was thinking about it at all is because earlier, I think it's when Friederson is either talking to Rotvang or Rotvang's on his own talking about it, but he starts talking about how he's going to use her to become Babylon, right? And it gives you a little bit of background on Babylon, the mother of all abominations. That actual bit of mythology is actually referenced in Twin Peaks, and Twin Peaks season 3 has this idea that like people are just starting to go kind of nuts, and it's more ethereal in that, and it's not like it's not like a literal presence that's walking around, because it's David Lynch. It's a lot more like ambiguous and stuff, but that's there. So when it referenced Babylon and that she's going to be Babylon, this like sort of like evil woman who's going to like spread like panic and whatever, I was like, oh, that's interesting. And then it actually has happened, and I was like, oh, this is actually like a 1920s version of that. It's just very much doing that idea that she is spreading this chaos throughout the community and making people act out. And obviously she does it with all the rich people where they all start fighting each other, and then she does it with the poor people by making them like sabotage the machines that run the city, which causes all the chaos towards the end. So all fascinating stuff. I liked all that.
I mean, I'm sure Lynch is familiar with the Bible as well, and he takes a lot of themes from that.
Oh, of course, yeah.
I mean, Babylon is a pretty famous. The Tower of Babel is very famous, which is brought up in this, and that represents also like the tower of which the people at the top live, the ones that get to be closest to God. Even the one that has, even when we see this boys club for the first time, it looks like they're on Mount Olympus, like they're literally doing like Olympic sports up there too.
Yeah.
And you can see all the Olympians on the side, and then you go to the Garden of Eden in the center, and there's a man there saying, "Who wants to be the woman for this man's pleasure?" And women are like coming forward, and the guy like fixes her makeup even to make her look even more like the standard of beauty for that time. And then that's when we first meet Maria, when she walks in with the kids. So it's I mean there's a lot of biblical stuff going on in this, and mind you, I haven't read the entire Bible. I only studied the first the first part of the Bible in school. So, and I didn't grow up religious, but it's in the zeitgeist for a lot of things. But I do think that this Messiah one character of Frida is also, he reminds me more of like, is it Siddhartha than he does Jesus in a way? I mean, although there's so much Christianity in this film, it's more of like. Are
you actually asking me? Because I've never heard this name before in my life. But
well, like Buddha. So, like Siddhartha was a prince who had everything and was completely naive to, like, other stuff that was out there, and all of a sudden that is shattered. When he realizes that all he has versus anyone else is just stuff, and so like he literally sheds all of his stuff. Like he shouldn't be better than anyone else. That's like his Prince Siddhartha's journey. And so that's what it reminds me more of than Christ, who kind of already grew up with nothing, as far as I know anyway. He was born in a barn. Gross. So I assume he grew up with nothing.
Well, to be fair, I don't think anyone. I mean, I certainly wasn't comparing him to Jesus, and I don't think I've read that anyone does.
Well, he had this like messianic sort of character, when you watch the film. Like we need our one. We need our guy who can who will save us. We're waiting on somebody to come. Like you said he was coming, but he hasn't shown up yet. We're like, just keep waiting. He'll show. We know that we need a mediator. He's going to be here one day. It is very Jesus-like.
Yeah, I guess it's whatever one you said sounds more applicable though.
Yeah. Buddha.
I like how you like I've not read the whole bit. Like I am assuming that unless you state you have read the Bible, I'm assuming that no one I meet has read any of the Bible. Okay.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I'm in America, so like a lot of people just grew up going to church, reading the Bible every day. So.
It's just I've not read the whole. It's like I wouldn't have assumed you had. I really would have assumed that.
Well, I didn't grow up religious, for anyone who doesn't know. So I don't want to start saying like, oh, there's all this Bible stuff, and someone be like, oh, well, you missed a very clear one. Like I don't know all of it. But like there's some, there's a lot of it in this movie that I recognize.
Oh sure. I mean, I can recognize it to a point, but like past a certain level, I'm just like, there's Bible stuff. I can see some of the allegory, but like beyond that, like I can't go any further because I just don't know it well enough to actually break it down.
Yeah, and I mean, also like the false god is New Testament, and I think anyway, and that seems to be in this movie quite a bit. With when she shows up and she's this alluring piece of machinery that's like that is sexy and is putting everybody into a trance, and they'll do anything for this machinery, but she's a false god, and she's being held up by like the 7 deadly sins at one point.
Yeah, she's a robot who's like a false god to them, but it's notable that she's created by the the rich people. She's created by the inventor and by the one who's trying to control. Because what I really got a lot of all of this is this idea that Friederson's trying to manipulate the lower class to control them. Felt super political, obviously, but it feels so political in a really sort of nefarious way that feels it feels very. This is part of the film that I think feels ahead of its time. Like the way in which it's looking at the way people are controlled, and the way that he's trying to sort of disillusion them and make them think they've got this illusion of choice, that they've got this illusion of like rebelling, but he's actually secretly kind of allowing it to a point so that he can just sort of fight back. That is quite fascinating, and ultimately it's not until he sees his own son in peril at the end that maybe he kind of is willing to see the humanity in all these people that he's been shitting on up until this point. Which, so, and if anything, like if I'm going to like say if there's a weak element to the story, it might actually be that is that I don't know if I necessarily get enough from himself that the ending where he is willing to work with everyone else necessarily fits. I don't know if they quite earn that per se, but it doesn't matter too much because like the entire world that's been created here is so engrossing, and the atmosphere of it is all just. It's just too like thick and too potent to not like be into it.
Yeah, the political stuff I definitely caught on to that. I was like, oh, this is really intriguing. Was the the fact that they want to take the idol of like this rebellious group and use her as a weapon. So, I mean, you could see that as like, oh, you think that we're evil, but like we're going to, defame this image that you have of this other person who's also evil now. We're going to make that, or even just buy them out, in a way. It's not happening in this movie, but you can kind of make that parallel to where like, like any cause that's popular, in order for industries to be like, oh yeah, we're part of this cause too. And now all of a sudden that cause doesn't have the same weight to it because it's being funded by people who are not evil, but like by corporations. All of a sudden it becomes a commodity, and it doesn't mean the same thing it used to when it was about people.
You could also compare it a little bit to like a political race and try to like undercut your opponent by making them more of a villain to everyone by sort of saying, hey, look at what they really do. No, I mean, and the real
political ad with all these like really terrible pictures of somebody or from like way back when they were in like college or something. And sure, yeah, they shouldn't have done blackface. Now you can't get behind this guy, even though we are still evil too.
yeah. So like you've got all these elements that are there with that side of the plot that I find super fascinating, and I do think the performance of Rotvang's quite fun. He's like quite demented looking the second he appears on camera, and he's really lapping it up. And I think it's fascinating to me. Like one of the weird things I have watching any movie from Germany from this time period is it's weird to stop and think that it's before World War II, and it's like, even that before like the Nazis came into power. This is like before, this predates that by like 6 years. So it's wild to think about like the time period this was being produced in and where it was being produced, and like the political climate that was kind of on the rise and where it was eventually going to go.
Like the patterns, or Fritz or whoever wrote the screenplay. I think it's based on like a short story or something, but like it's they're probably seeing the rise of these fascist groups.
I mean, think about part of what Hitler did was that he dehumanized other groups as the villains. Jewish people specifically is the big one, but like he dehumanized other people and said they're the enemy. They've done this. That was part of his like platform that he built his following on, and it's kind of fascinating to see people kind of almost warning others against parts of that in this. I mean, it's very different. It's not the exact. It's not a 1-to-1, but you can definitely see how some of these feelings were there at the time, and unfortunately didn't.
I mean, you can even make the comparison of like, of course, like it's Germany that would make the first movie about a robot because they want to create a master race, and that's just another interpretation of like Pygmalion or Frankenstein or some. You just want to create your own perfect being.
Yeah.
And the Olympics obviously were a big deal to Hitler, and that's depicted in this. And as like the 1%, everybody's just doing all these perfect sports and their perfect bodies. And
which is part of why I think the story. Well, there's obviously these things that are a bit too quick, or maybe some turning points that are maybe not quite as earned in a traditional storytelling way. The reason why the story, I think, still holds up as being quite relevant is that you can recognize things in it that are relevant to this time period that feel quite like a big deal, but then there's the stuff with the rich versus the poor that still feels just as relevant today. And then even the idea that there is like an alt-right kind of movement in the modern day, still it makes it almost feel like the stuff that was relevant, that feels specific to the time, is almost relevant again, sadly, in a different way now. Like there's just there's a lot of things in there that. This core idea that there's these people that are slaving away at the bottom to because because the main character Frieder, part of his path to try and find her again after he befriends someone else that gets fired from his dad. We'll talk about him in a bit, but he goes and he takes the place of someone who's working because he sees an accident the first time he's down in the pits looking at the workers and the machines. And there's this, he has an hallucination where he sort of sees it turn into like a monster. It's like a big sort of demonic looking sphinx.
Modoc, I think you call it.
Yeah, that's what you call it. Moloch, yeah.
Moloch.
But like he sees that the first time, and then he goes back down and he's horrified by what people are getting put through. And he actually takes the place, he swaps places with a worker down there who's struggling to, and all it feels like he's doing is moving the hands of like a clock, effectively. Every time the lights light up, he just keeps moving the hands.
But there's a meter, so if they go too slow, something will explode. And
Yeah.
you can see that it's like a thermometer rising up.
Yeah. So he takes his place because he's too tired. And what I loved is at the end of this workday, like Frieder looks even more tired than everyone else who's like just ending their shift. Like because he's never done a hard day's work like everyone else has down here. He looks like he's about to have a heart attack when everyone else is just out of breath and like walking slow. He looks like he's like collapsing compared to everyone else. But he takes this role, and this guy is given his clothes and his identity, and he goes out into the world, and he's meant to go straight to this friend that he's made. What was it, Josephat, yeah. I'm probably mispronouncing that, but that's his name.
He took German.
If he didn't learn
is it
every
Joe or
name.
Yo?
Josephat, maybe Josephat. You're right. But he instead of going to where he's supposed to, this apartment where this other guy's living, this worker, like, he sees like a flyer for like a party, and he's never been to like a party like this before, and he's immediately
he's never had fun.
He sees like a woman like in another car, because they're up in like one of these big like highways that are up in the skyscrapers, and he looks over and sees this woman putting on makeup, and he's like she doesn't look like homeless. What is this? And he's just drawn in by the allure and stuff, and most of this is actually in the extra footage that has clearly been put back in, and a lot of it is like the thin man like coming after him and then going after Josephat at his place, and that's where we get to see the fancy elevators and all that stuff. But all that menacing stuff with him, I think, is a lot of fun.
Yeah. A kind of a modern day retelling of this is that episode of Black Mirror with where they're working on the bikes and they have to earn credits every day.
Oh yeah, 15 million credits or whatever it's called. Yeah,
something like that. Yeah, and our main character, the Get Out guy,
Kaluuya, Daniel
Kaluuya.
There you go.
He ends up becoming like a voice of the working class, and only just to be tempted and ultimately bought out by the corporation that's running everything. So he still is a voice for them, but he's being paid by the corporation. Just the idea that, when you break out of your class, that you no longer see yourself as somebody who's still part of that older class that needs help. It's just the temptation of being in the upper class is just too much, that they'll never be able to work together. Like, they're always going to have to be separate.
Yeah. Well, not necessarily, but you're hoping like that's it always shows you that danger of that happening.
Yeah.
And people need to be like conscious and aware of that fact.
The allure of having everything that you want because you're higher up than everyone else. You're on the top of the mountain, it's or the top of the tower.
Because I don't think, because this obviously ends with a happy ending, whereas that Black Mirror episode ends with like a total downer of like a
like every Black Mirror episode.
But like I think the point of that is a warning that we have to be aware of this, so we don't just like let this happen all over and over again. Like the next people who do break out of the lower class into the upper class should remember where they come from, so that they can improve things and make things better.
Yeah. They tend to just be like, well, I deserve it more, but because I worked harder than everyone else, and the system worked because it worked for me,
I mean, yeah, that's
usually what I hear. But yeah, you're right. It shouldn't be that way.
Yeah, but not everyone is that way. I think it's a little bit too nihilistic to say that absolutely everyone who breaks out of a lower class into an upper class just becomes a dick instantly.
Maybe that's just my experience.
I don't think that's completely true. I think there are some people who are decent people who are still decent even if they become like, rich or whatever. So I guess we have to talk about all the chaos that sort of happens in the back half. Robot Maria, she encourages like a rebellion, and they all destroy some of the machines. What they don't realize though is that all of their children, all the poor people's children who have left in what they call Worker City, where all the workers live, that all starts to flood because of them destroying. So they basically are dooming their own children to death, and it's only because real Maria at this point has escaped the evil scientist, which is the one scene that's not back, is like just a text telling you that she managed to escape, which is a pretty important detail, that she was kidnapped and has now escaped. But her, and then eventually Frieder and Josephat sort of show up as well, and they all sort of help save the children and get them up all these stairs and ladders, take them out into the upper world. and are like, why are the lights off? And it's because, you know, all the machines have turned off. Like the machine of the city is the, you know, because literally the machine that destroys called the machine heart, I think.
Yeah. That's the last one, right? Everything else seems to be running something else. I don't know, but like the heart is the one where Grot is in protecting the foreman. He's the one who's protecting the heart. Yeah.
So they rescue all the children, and then it's around here where all of the poor people find out from Grot, who's went and realised that their city's flooded. He's like, hey, where are all your children? Like, the city's underwater. And they all start, like, you know, crying and bawling, and then they blame Maria and say she's the witch that made us do this, which is why they chase her down to burn her at the stake. And they're actually chasing the real Maria at one point here for a while, even though she saved her children. And notably, Frieder says, we'll take all the kids to the boys club. Like, that's where they put all the kids for safety, whilst they're off doing other things. And it's just by luck that Robot Maria is still with like a bunch of rich people partying, and when the real Maria runs through that crowd, they kind of switch to the Robot Maria, and she's the one that gets burned and reveals that she's a robot. And unfortunately, Rotsvang, the inventor, is like now delirious and starting to think that Maria is Hel, his dead lover, and starts chasing her around. And this is where we get a very sort of typical like old school story ending where he like chases her up a roof, and then Frieder chases them up, and they end up fighting on top of the roof, and he eventually falls to his death. And there's a lot of shots of Frieder's father looking up and like holding his head and like, oh, like my boy. He's finally seen the value of human life or something, maybe a little bit, possibly.
Yeah, I think could just be like the narcissism in him, you know, where he just that's his son, that's his his heir, the one that's supposed to take over things. That is the reason why he loves his son so much. But it's also just like the moment where he has some sort of humanity. So, like, maybe that is just a reminder that everyone in any class still has the same value when it comes to family and seeing human life. But
because he's pretty monstrous throughout, you know, like he fires a guy early on because someone else tells him stuff that rather than
and he was going to kill himself rather than go to a lower class.
Not a dad. Yeah, the guy that got fired, Josephat, was going to kill himself, and it's actually Frieder who steps in and says no. And Frieder even says to his dad, like, Father, do you know what it means to be like exiled by you? It means he has to go down below and become one of the workers and stuff. Yeah. And he doesn't care.
Shoot himself.
And
then become part of the system.
And Friederson then asks the Thin Man to like keep an eye on his son because he doesn't trust his son anymore. So, you know, he comes across very villainous. He then wants to manipulate the workers by using the robot lady, and so on and so on. So he's making all these evil choices just to control the people in his life, whether it be the working class, whether it be his son. He wants to control everyone the entire time. And I guess it's when it's not in his control and it's truly up to fate, like his son's own like fight up in the rooftop, where he finally kind of like lets that fall a little bit. And I guess he'll go through with things because his son wants it to happen. His son, you know, will be the mediator that says, no, have some compassion, you old fart. Like, give the people some rights. Let them have some lives, please. Yeah. You know. So, and there's even a little bit. I wouldn't say it mirrors the story necessarily, but even the fact that he's fallen in love with a woman from the working class, you know, it's a little Romeo and Juliet kind of, you know, two different you know circles of life kind of thing. So there's a lot of classic tropes in it. There absolutely is. But it also feels like super ahead of its time in like other ways, even if it's quite I wouldn't say cheesy, but like, you know, when the actual like things happening where he's got Maria on like the bed, the scientist, and we've got like the waves of electricity like going through her, and then like I
love that shot, and she's wearing like the swim cap with all the I don't know, wires and stuff attached to her head.
Yeah, and then like the robot sort of just, you know, crossfades into like being like her on the chair.
I love that. That was like the most science fiction this movie got.
Yeah, we had that, and we had the city. And the themes are very science fiction, of course. I mean, they can be in lots of different genres, but we get a lot of these social topics popping up in science fiction, I feel like.
Oh, yeah.
Especially when we have, Yeah, because in many ways this was like a yeah, it's a weird thing to compare it to, because I don't love this movie, even though a lot of people do. But, you know, like, you can sort of see how something like Snowpiercer exists because of this movie, you know? There's two separate classes, lower class rising up, you know? But it's very, like, confined. In this case, it's a whole city, but it's very confined in the sense that, oh no, we can just bubble it down into one group of, like, this system. As opposed to this, like, intricate thing that the world is, where there's all these different countries and different, you know, like, there's a lot of, it's all more complicated in the real world, but,
Sure, yeah, I understand.
But the movie makes it simple. It's like, no, one city, one metropolis. And Fritz Lang, you know, he, like, I have to imagine at the time this was made, like, part of the appeal of doing it was that these cities that were just starting to look like something kind of like this, not exactly this obviously, but lots of skyscrapers in New York, things like that. That would have been a relatively new, like, sight at the time. That would have been something that would have been quite, you know, visually, you know, spectacular just to see in real life. So that's
the
probably
20s, so everyone's getting their own vehicles now.
Yeah. So that's probably the other part of this, is that he, like, this is the envisioning of, oh, what are these skyscraper filled cities going to be like when they're done, you know, kind of thing. And that's what this is. So there's a lot of there's a lot of imagery in the future in it. There's a lot of hopeful ideas, but obviously the actual warning of keeping humanity, and the fact that the main sort of villainous gimmick, the villainous, you know, MacGuffin, if you will, is the lack of humanity. It's literally just a robot with a human face. So you know, a lot of classic science fiction themes. Maybe not that classic at the time, but certainly are now.
Definitely, yeah. No, I really enjoyed this movie a lot. I don't know. I was definitely expecting a shorter movie. I did not know that until you told me that the movie was like over 2 hours. I always imagined this movie only being like 70 minutes. But maybe that's because I heard somewhere that there was a shorter film. But it's a long movie. You're right. There's a lot of classic tropes, but it kind of makes it feel more of like an epic novel that's been adapted that way. You know, like almost like you're watching something from Homer. The Greek, not the Simpson, but
I assumed as much. Yes.
I mean, there's something about it that makes it feel very classical in that kind of writing style.
I think that
in the visual form.
That makes a lot of sense though when you think about it, though, right? Like, because obviously Frankenstein's credit has been the first ever science fiction story written, right? And this is, you know, a few decades later. Were the early days of film, especially feature length cinema, right? And it makes sense that a lot of early cinema is like trying to find what cinema is. It's, you know, trying to find, and I think as the decades go on, I think the way stories are told and differences between film and like books and other forms of storytelling become more distinct. And I think, you know, these days, I think there's a way you tell a story in a movie. And we understand what that is. I mean, there's a way you tell a story when you're writing. Because I think that difference you're talking about, where it feels like, you know, something that's been adapted from a book, even though it isn't. It kind of like, it's because that's just what stories were at the time. Like stories like came, you know, that was the form of storytelling at the time that was established, that everyone understood and had been around for a long time. Whereas today, filmmaking's been established, and we can recognize how films tell stories.
But there's still something about it that feels more like an epic, rather than like a classical story. You know, there's a story about, I don't know, what's an example I can use? Who reads books anymore? Well, even Frankenstein versus like Ovid's Metamorphoses, or I'll just stick to Homer, like the Iliad, you know, where that feels like it's, or like Milton, you know, like Paradise Lost, so like a classic epic poem almost, where it's like written for God, like this is God writing through me to make the great epic. That's what it feels like when you watch this versus like even when I watch Faust, which is a very traditional story that comes from like the Renaissance, but it's still, this one feels more like ambitious. You know,
absolutely.
there's something about it that's elevated versus the other storytelling. Like watching, 2001 versus Logan's Run or something,
What a comparison.
There's a grandiose, like, it almost feels like you're watching something epic because of the difference,
I think there's two things get into this. I think one of them is that you're watching something by an actual artist, right? To go with the Kubrick versus Logan's Run, right?
Yeah.
So you've got that, I think, there, because Fritz Lang is a talented filmmaker, and he's clearly, this is very ambitious for the time period. This is like, he is reaching beyond what other movies would be trying for such a long time in this film. Like, to the point where most films we review tend to be 70s and onwards, because, 50s and 60s have your cheesy sci-fi, and we'll do them from time to time. But this movie's kind of like hitting for something that wouldn't really be in movies again in science fiction for a long time. And then the other thing, of course, is the fact that it is the dawn of cinema, effectively, right? We're in these early days of film where doing something on this scale is big. It's so much bigger than a lot of other movies. Not all. There's other examples that people will probably tell us, and probably war movies, I imagine, the other big ones at the time, just because that's what was popular and people put a lot of effort into. But it feels so big in scope and scale and size that I think that, combined with the fact that you've got an actual auteur, if you want to use a pretentious word, making it
fits.
it feels bigger. It feels like bigger than its time. It feels bigger and ahead of its time, in the same way that a Kubrick film does. And it's the sort of thing where, much like a Kubrick, not everyone's going to get it and see the appeal. Some people, a lot of your casual film goers would never watch a silent black and white 2.5 hour movie anyway, but you can compare it to something like Kubrick, where a lot of casual moviegoers don't like 2001. They think it's long and pretentious, or they just don't get it, and they don't really want to think about it. They want a plot that's more straightforward, and which is fine. I'm not even bad mouthing people who aren't it. There's definitely some people that I would badmouth that will speak ill of it, but not everyone. I think Metropolis is very much one of our early examples of that in cinema. It
definitely feels like this is something special when you watch it.
And the fact that it was misunderstood at the time, or people sort of wrote it off, or maybe people were just so determined to not agree with communism in any way that anything that was against capitalism was shunned.
Any sort of critique or criticism, because they're not saying let's do away with it. I mean, they're still like, we just have to work together for the head, the heart, and the hand have to make the body, so let's compromise.
That's true. That's very true. It's not even saying we have to abolish the entire system. It's just saying, let's not be inhumane about it. Let's make it work for everyone, and the part of everyone in the system has to work with it.
At one point, the father, who I keep thinking of Ronnie Cox, but it's not him, obviously. But in my head, he's Ronnie Cox, because that's the kind of actor that would play this role now, or in the movies.
Well, not now. Is Ronnie Cox even alive still? I don't know.
I think he is, but he'll be old. Not acting.
Yes, this is Ronnie Cox from RoboCop. Just for anyone who's not keeping up with who this is, what she's talking about,
or from Total Recall.
Yes,
he's Ronnie Cox of this movie. He, at one point, and when everything's breaking down, he tells Grodd to let them in, let them destroy the heart. He still wants everything to fall at this point, because I guess in his mind, if it all breaks down, then and everybody suffers, he's still going to be on top, and they'll still come to him for leadership. So he still wants to, overall, it doesn't matter what happens at this point anymore, or how many lives are lost. All that matters to him is being on top of whatever this hierarchy is. Which I thought was an interesting turn of the character. I was like, why is he letting them in there? Oh, because all that matters is power.
Yeah, all boils down to power and staying at the top of the food chain.
Build it again when they're all suffering.
And don't get me wrong, watching this from a modern lens, it's a little bit quaint in the way that, Frieda, the main character, is I've been a rich boy all my life, and now I see how hard it is for the poor people, so I want to champion for them. It's got a little bit of that I'm going to go down and be the savior of these people kind of, plot, which you know, it's easy, I think, to not necessarily get enough from his character to really want to root for him. You have to accept that we're in a simpler storytelling sort of time period.
Well,
in
yeah,
that sense.
he represents the heart of it. So like it's not just the mediator, but someone who understands both sides. And I think if everybody were in that position, you know, that they understood both sides rather than thinking like, oh, they're above, so they're evil, and they're below, so that's where they belong. You know, they're not deserving or something like that. There should be, you know, seeing both sides of everything. I don't know, but I'm starting to mess up my words a bit because I need a mediator between my brain and my mouth.
Well, no, all I'm saying is that I think as a character, like I think everything it's doing thematically makes complete sense. It's just that as a character that we want to like root for and care about. I don't know if I ever like do, because he's just a little bit, I won't say one note per se, but he just, you know, he sort of turns so quick that I feel like a modern version of this story, not that I think it should be remade, I'm not saying that, but like a modern sort of character of this type, I would say you'd want to feel kind of that transition more, where he sees things that sort of change his mind and open his eyes, and that should feel like a proper like arc in a story where we can root for him now because he feels like he's really grown. Whereas in this, it's like he sees one thing and he's like, father, this is an outrage. What's happening?
Yeah, he was living in a bubble, a privileged bubble that got busted, you know?
Yeah.
So all of a sudden everything is different for him. And
so,
that's it.
Yeah. But all I'm really describing here is just a difference in how, like, for the better and good writing, characters have become, like, written and more, like, as times went on and we've evolved how we write movie characters and stuff.
And with dialogue.
Of course, with dialogue. But, you know, obviously not all examples of modern movies are good. They're not. There's tons of shit writing, right? Like, I'll complain about it constantly on this show when it comes up. But when it's good, characters are you know, they've got more going on. There's more nuance to them. There's more going on behind the eyes. There's more actual arcs happening and things like that. Whereas, you know, the characters in this story, not all of them, but at times they're a bit more simplistic to serve the plot, and it works in the movie, but I'm just sort of saying I can see where the improvements in time can come from, and where it's ahead of its time, but where it's all still very much of its time in other ways as well, and that's okay. It's just what it is. But I think you let a lot of that go in this, whereas if a movie came out now and had some of these things, you would not let it go. You'd be like, no, why does this feel like it was a movie that was made, you know, 90 years ago? Mm-hmm. That wouldn't make any sense.
I definitely don't want it to be remade.
No.
But if it was, I'd say Denis Villeneuve.
If he's already done Blade Runner,
you know, he would do it.
But he's already done Blade Runner, though. Do you really want him to do another futuristic city movie?
Yeah, but he did Blade Runner and he did Dune, and he made both of them better.
No, but well, sure, he did Dune, but like I'm talking about, he's already done like a futuristic city movie. He doesn't need to do another one. But too similar.
I don't know. Maybe there'd be. I think he would make it different. He wouldn't make the Blade Runner again. It would look different.
Also, Denis Villeneuve's a little overrated. All right.
How dare you?
I really like Arrival, but
there's definitely a lot. I think Dark City definitely took a lot from this as well, aesthetic wise.
I can kind of see that, but despite the fact that it was like 70 years later, much worse.
It's just the editing, that's all. The editing and Kiefer Sutherland.
And also a really stupid superhero movie, like fight scene at the end. Come on now, that was bad.
I can't remember.
It turned into a really bad comic book movie in the last like 20 minutes.
It began the comic book movie trope. There might have been a beam of light.
There might have been, but there was definitely people flying around and like dodgy visual effects. It's like, yeah. Anyway, so yes.
So no modern day director for you then? Just Lynch.
I wouldn't want anyone to make this. I think it's far more interesting to compare some of the themes and the ideas that Lynch took for Twin Peaks and see how he did them in the context of Twin Peaks than it would be for Lynch to just do a Metropolis movie. I mean, I don't get me wrong, it'd be fascinating. I'd watch it, see what it's like. Don't get, like, of course I would, but no, I don't want it remade. Like,
Have you watched The Fablemans yet?
Not yet, no.
Okay.
Why?
Lynch is in it.
Like actual David Lynch, or someone plays young David Lynch?
No, actual David Lynch.
Okay. Cool. Is he playing himself?
No.
Oh, he's just playing
But
a role.
it's a surprise. I don't want to hold that.
Okay. He played a character in Twin Peaks. He was an FBI agent.
He was like the most amazing part of The Fablemans.
Doesn't surprise me. He's a very entertaining man. He's a tour de force, as David Lynch. Yeah. But yeah, Metropolis is very good. Well, it's turned into me saying what things are overrated in present day. Metropolis is very good and is a founding.
I was the nihilist here.
Is that? You're a nihilist when it comes to like society. I'm a nihilist when it comes to movie
I have
quality.
A degree in environmental science. Okay, it was 4 years of nihilism. All right.
We're not talking about environmental science though. We're not talking about the climate. We're not talking about anything related to that.
Okay, I like people.
But they're the worst part of society. They're the worst part. People suck.
Yeah, but they can change.
Oh, you've changed your tune. You've changed your tune.
No, I haven't.
But yeah, so it was. I think what's wild about this is that as much as things change, and a lot of things has changed in film since this movie, there's so many IDs and things in it that have stayed the same, and you know, there's something comforting about some of it, and there's something, you know, sad about some other parts of it that have not changed. You know, so it's a really fascinating window into the past, and just you know, man, technology and just like the way things have looked and have just changed so much in the last 90 plus years. On film specifically, I suppose. I shouldn't say. Although I'm sure things look quite different in the real world compared to 100 years ago too. People were still getting electricity installed in the 20s. Not everyone had it yet. So, yeah. But yeah, that's Metropolis. I guess we should do the daunting thing of rating it. I always feel weird rating a movie like this because it's like so, you know, historically important, but you don't necessarily feel like you want to give it the rating of like a perfect score because it doesn't necessarily mean as much to you as your other favorites and things like that. So I find it difficult to rate a movie like this, but luckily Tara has to go first. So.
I'll give it a 10.
Whoa! That easy.
I mean, honestly, yeah, it was kind of easy to rate it from the beginning because it does feel special when you watch it, and it is super relevant today. And I think the history of it, I think, is also pretty fascinating. Just like when it came out and what it means to people, what it means to Germany. Like, it was a pretty. I think it's a pretty incredible movie, and I'm okay giving it a 10.
Yeah, I think I'm not going to give it a 10 because
it's not Terminator, so.
I've given other movies a 10. Shut up. Right?
Not The Matrix.
Like, you don't just get a 10 handed out from you, right? I'm no 10 slut, okay?
Oh, what's the best sci-fi movie of the 90s? Oh, this 9.5 out of 10.
Not every decade has a 10. Not every decade has a 10. That's okay. Right. But I'm going to give it a 9, and I think the fact that, and the reason why, because I would agree that from a historical perspective, it is ultra important. If you're grading it on that scale alone, it obviously is a 10, and there's no disputing that. I'm giving it a 9, and the fact that in 2023, I almost said 2022, I'm not, it's the 2nd of January, I'm not used to be 2023 yet. In 2023, the fact that it's only kind of like lost like a point by my gauge in that time period of like, okay, how enjoyable is it to watch now? How relevant is it now? How effective is it to evoke feelings when I'm watching it? The fact that it's still a 9 and it's only dropped a point in 100 years is great. That's special, right? You know, I think, you know, we see this a lot about science fiction, how it kind of came into what we like about it really in the 70s. We like cheesy stuff in the 50s and 60s, but it really came into, you know, we moved on 70 seasons. We talk a lot about how films got a lot more experimental that decade, and they're not all hits, right? Some of them are a little bit just, not quite to where we would like them to get to. But by the end of the decade, you're getting Star Wars and Alien, you're getting these things, and 80s is full of stuff, 90s is full of stuff, so on and so on, right? And up to present day. So I think a lot of movies from the 70s, I don't even have to I don't have to separate it. Like, they feel modern to me. Like, that's when movies started feeling modern, and they feel like they sort of hit this sweet spot of like, this is where I think of modern cinema starting, is the 70s. So I don't have to gauge it in any sort of way. But stuff from before that, there is kind of stories were told differently. When you watch a movie from the 40s, romances feel a bit too quick, or tension's done in a different way. That doesn't really feel tense by today's standards. It just feels kind of, it's kind of fun, and it's, you accept it for what it is. I think Metropolis holds up surprisingly well, even with some of its old school sensibilities, despite the fact that it predates most other movies that I've ever seen, right? Other than Nosferatu and maybe one other thing. It's the oldest film I've seen. So, congratulations, 9 out of 10, Metropolis.
You got the Terrifier 2 rating. Congratulations.
Are you trying to diminish my rating by comparing it to something else? Not all ratings are equal, okay? Right? There's a scale, but just
I think it's funny to say that.
But just because I give one movie of a certain type, Also, this is rich coming from you with the 10s you've been handing out this year, okay?
Wait, we're only in the second day.
Oh, well, 2022, you know what I mean? The last year. The 10s have been flying at Neil Breen like ninja throwing stars.
Oh, yeah. Talk about masterpieces. Wow.
Do you know what?
There is something very special about watching his films.
Neil Breen, in many ways, is the exact opposite of Metropolis, in that Metropolis is doing so much in a time where none of it was there to be used and it all had to be created. Neil Breen is someone who's in a time where all of the impossible is achievable, and somehow he can do none of it. That's the beauty of Neil Breen.
The ambition is the same, right? The ambition, the vision, yes. With the right resources, he can make a Black Panther movie. But he chooses to make what he does because it's the art and the vision that's important to him.
Yes, and when you point out
he is the greatest hacker of all time.
When you point out the Fritz Lang movie where Fritz Lang has cast himself as the world's best of anything, then you can compare the ambition. But there's an egotistical side to a Neil Breen / Tommy Wiseau / other directors of that
ilk. What you need to make masterpieces. Everyone knows this. It's the common thread throughout all the geniuses of our time. Ego.
Yes, ego plus talent, and one of those is definitely lacking.
How dare you? You just don't see it. You don't see it. It's behind the camera.
How did our Metropolis review end with a comparison to Neil Breen? I think it was me that brought him up, but I knew better. I should have known better, because it was instantly going to become a debating point with you. So,
gotta defend my boy. He's coming out with a movie this year.
Yes, Neil Breen, the actor / director who is somewhere between 25 and 75 years old.
Depending on his leading actress, who he grew up with at the same time.
All right, well that does it for Metropolis. Thank you very much. From one of the oldest, if not the oldest movie we'll ever review on the show, to a movie from 2022 that we'll be catching up on. We'll be looking at Duel next week. Not the Steven Spielberg movie Duel. Duel, D-U-A-L. We'll be looking at next week, so look forward to that, everyone. Catching up.
I'm still gonna watch Duel, though.
You can still watch Duel if you want as well, but we can compare them.
I'll do a nice comparison during the review.
But that's what we're going to be doing next week. Thank you very much for joining us. Let us know what you think of Metropolis if you've seen it in the comments below. And you can support all the content over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV, or becoming a YouTube member. You get a bonus episode every month at the $5 tier on Patreon. or it's like $7 on YouTube for that tier, I think. But you get Meltdown, which is a monthly show where we talk about the movies we're watching over the month that weren't sci-fi, plus we do a little sci-fi quiz to each other. So that's well, we give each other we do a sci-fi quiz to each other. Sounds really weird. Sounds really threatening. Sounds like some sort of like weird version of a solid. I'll sci-fi quiz you. You don't see it coming.
Put the eye clamps on from Clockwork Orange.
Yes, but yeah, so you can support those ways, of course. You can also support free by simply liking, subscribing, sharing us on the social medias and all that kind of thing, and of course rating the podcast on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast from, 5 stars. But that is the show. So I'll also take this time to thank our Patreon producers for the month. So thank you very much to Tyler Hess, Cindy Pellissier, David Sharp, Bordenau, Christopher Moy, David Brown, and Al Tradesman. Thank you very much. So that's the show. That's the Atomic Cinema Experiment. Thank you very much once again for watching or listening. We always appreciate it. Keep watching science fiction and computer at Salsa.